Well, Craig, quite a lot going on behind the scenes, technically speaking, at Monza, but in terms of our 3D animation, we're focusing on Mercedes.
Yeah, we're going to have a look at the W08 this week. Car brought in changes both for Monza and potentially some sort of ongoing changes. Obviously, as we saw at Spa, Mercedes are running very much low downforce, low drag setup. That's really working for the moment. For Monza, they went a step further, so we just sort of wind on and have a look at the rear wing. This is their sort of standard wing, already still quite curvy, but quite large. You can see how deep it is. And then we move to the Monza wing. So straight away, you can see the wing is both much shallower, so it's got much less angle of attack, but it's also much shorter. When you look at the wing from above, you can see that the wing is a lot shorter. This means it's obviously less effective as a wing. Most of the rear downforce will be coming from the underbody and the diffuser. They made some changes to the end plate as well. And this is one of the things that Mercedes seem to be able to do, is run much, much less downforce than other teams. Still have the stability in the car, still have that braking stability that's so important at Monza. But obviously, when you take off the drag from the rear wing, you're suddenly getting so much more top speed. And you know, again, as we keep saying, in Spa, they took this approach, Ferrari didn't, and that's really one of the sort of the key changes. And
in explaining why they're so good under heavy braking, maybe we could say slightly longer wheelbase than Ferrari and Red Bull. And in addition to that, if we're talking about why that might be the case, why Mercedes might be better under heavy braking from high speed, one, they actually don't run any rake on the car, whereas, well, they run a little bit, but Red Bull for sure run a lot more, and Ferrari a little bit more, and perhaps that gives them more stability, and of course a slightly longer wheelbase as well.
Yeah, and obviously they've got a very good handle on the aero of that car, so they can obviously work out what they can afford to run. Still running the T-wing, which a lot of people were quite interested about at Monza, and think, well, if you're running such a small rear wing, why are you running a T-wing? Well, the T-wing is very efficient. It sits up high and really good airflow, so the downforce for the drag that it creates is more efficient than the rear wing, so you can afford to still run that and then run, therefore, an even smaller rear wing. So that's the sort of the big Monza change. That will obviously all get packed away, and we'll be lucky if we see that again this year. And then they'll go back to the usual high downforce wings for the races that are coming up. If we now roll on...
Just on that, what is the quickest circuit of the remaining tracks? Do we think it's probably Austin with the long straight? Would it be
Austin would be one of them, yes.
Yeah, Suzuka's straight's not really long enough, is it?
No, Suzuka, you probably run a bit more downforce.
It's a shame, because the cars look so nice in low downforce trim in general.
Well, this has always been the aim, is to have Monza-style wings for every race at the, in the season, but it's obviously tricky to achieve that. And you're always going to run different wing levels. But generally, we saw people really cut the downforce down on the cars to reduce drag, obviously with these big tyres at the racing this year. If we wind onwards, we see a couple of developments that we'll probably see going forwards in following races. Deep in the dark area around the rear suspension, you can see just highlighted here a little fin that's attached to the bodywork and sits in front of the rear wishbone. Almost impossible to notice this until you're really close to the car, which luckily we're able to do during scrutineering. And this is quite an interesting little piece here. It's all about managing the airflow through the rear suspension that therefore then goes over the diffuser, which is critical for getting good downforce from the car, obviously with very little drag, which is important for Monza. But the reason they've got this as a fin and not a bigger wishbone is the wishbones are already as wide as they can possibly be within the regulations. You couldn't have a completely closed-up wishbone, as we saw Minardi run, you know, sort of decades ago at Monza. So little bits of bodywork. Yes, exactly. So a little bit of bodywork there, just to help smooth the airflow out over the suspension. Nice. Something tucked away, and just shows you that, again, the level of detail Mercedes are really getting
well
into.
Spotted too.
Moving on, another piece in the area which we all talk about constantly for the complexity on the Mercedes is tucked down on the leading edge of the floor here is you have these three little veins just being highlighted there. And these are sat behind the barge boards, and this is all one piece of bodywork. When they take the floor off, the barge boards and all of these bits come with it. So they're very hard to see unless you're literally stood over the top looking down. And Red Bull introduced these back in Silverstone, I think it may have been. And what these are doing, these are just like little turning vanes, and they're just grabbing the air that's passing low down under the car and push it out sideways to reduce the pressure that builds up under the sort of lower leading edge of the floor. And this, as much as it's pushing air out here, is actually all about getting the airflow cleaner and the pressure right in front of the diffuser. Again, making the diffuser working better. It's the most important facet of the car that teams can do to create sort of more performance, more downforce. So little Red Bull copy there. It was quite interesting. It's not often that we see Mercedes copy too many things. They're normally leading, but little details tucked away there.
I'm sure Adrian knew he would be very flattered by that. Speaking of Red Bull, they ran a really small rear wing at Monza, and we mentioned that.
Everyone was calling it the F3 rear wing, wasn't it? Because it was absolutely tiny.
And with a very high level of rake. They looked a bit softer than the Ferraris in the wet, which were a lot more skittish, and running more rake than the Ferraris, even though the Ferrari has been designed as a higher rake car. So maybe, as we said earlier, that might be an area where Ferrari lost their way with setup.